Welcome back. In this video, we'll talk about Kant's second categorical imperative, the respect for persons rule. Kant rightly points out that there's something morally special about human beings, something that sets us apart from all of the things in reality, at least that we know about, and that's our ability to make autonomous decisions. And in noticing this fact about human beings, Kant said, look, given the fact that there's a special fact about human beings, that we owe each other a special kind of respect. And that leads Kant to the second categorical imperative that we'll discuss presently. The categorical imperative of respect for persons is expressed as follows. So act that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, always as an end and never as a means only. Again, this is in Kant's somewhat obtuse vocabulary, and there's some very powerful ideas hidden in there, but this one can be distilled down to 3 words with a contraction. What this principle is expressing is the idea, basically the commandment, don't use people. Don't use people. It's as simple as that. This is an anti-exploitation principle. What Kant is saying essentially is that all human beings, by virtue of our rational capacities, that is, in terms of our autonomy, are entitled to a certain level of respect and inherent worth and dignity, given that power that we have. That human beings are special and unique as moral beings, that we have the capacity to reason out the moral law for ourselves. And because that's true, all of us owe each other a special obligation. And that special obligation is to treat a person like a person rather than treating a person like a thing. So essentially, this principle is spelling out the notion of what it means to objectify someone, which is a new moral notion that we haven't seen in our theories to this point. Kant points out that when we treat a person just as a stepping stone to our own desires, goals, and ambitions, what we've essentially done is treat a person like a thing in the world, to objectify them, to treat them like an object. And because humanity is special, we owe them that specific dignity, that inherent respect that comes from being an autonomous moral being. Now notice here that the clause at the end says only, that we should treat ourselves and others not as means only. But what does that mean? Well, it's true that we have kinds of exchanges with each other where we mutually use each other to our advantage. But Kant sees that not as a problem when there's a kind of cooperation or mutual exchange. So, for example, you're using your professor in this class as a means of being educated, furthering your goal towards your degree and eventually your career path and that sort of thing. And your professor is using you as a means of, well, getting paid, or maybe they just really like to talk about this stuff, so you're a captive audience that's forced to listen to that person talk for however many hours a week. Whatever the case may be, we're not exploiting each other in that kind of circumstance. What we're doing is mutually cooperating to help each other along towards our own goals. There's nothing wrong with that kind of cooperative use. It's the exploitive use where we fail to recognize that someone has their own goals, ambitions, desires, and so on. What Kant doesn't mean is that we have to be nice or friendly or kind, hold doors open for people, the kinds of things we typically think of when we think of respect, like deference to our parents and that sort of thing. It's just to not obstruct people on the pathway to their own goals and ambitions and to discover their own good. Notice, too, that you can exploit yourself. You might wonder, how's that possible? Aren't I always acting in service of my own goals? Well, Kant points to some very interesting cases to say, look, it's entirely possible that we exploit ourselves, and we ought to avoid activities of that sort as well. One might think of the heroin addict who sees his life just as a means of chasing a high. Kant might argue, look, that person's simply exploiting him or herself as a means of chasing pleasure and not living up to the standards of one's own humanity. We might think of prostitution as a way of treating oneself like a thing, that a person is reduced to a commodity. So there are lots of ways, and this is an important idea, that we might exploit ourselves as well as exploiting others, and all those things should be avoided. If we have to make an ethical decision, Kant says, on a sort of situational basis, one of our tests is this. Are we exploiting anyone or treating someone like an object? If the answer is yes, then we're doing something wrong. If the answer is no, then we're on the right path. In the next video, we'll put all of this together. We'll take the principle of universality and the principle of respect for persons, and we'll talk through how to apply those to Karina's dilemma to give you a sense of how this works in making a real-life decision.